Hey y'all, Justin here. Before this episode begins, I just wanted to give a little disclaimer. I guess that's the best word for this. You see, there's a little bit of an issue with the sound quality on this episode, specifically in regards to my vocals. Unfortunately, we have tried everything that we could think of to fix it, but it seems to be beyond repair. Our only option really was to just re-record the whole episode, but we didn't really want to do that because it would have delayed the release of the episode by at least a week, which would have then delayed the next episode and the next roulette and the next series and so on and so on. So that's obviously not ideal. And B, it would have kind of killed the spontaneity of the episode, which we really didn't want. So, while we do work off a lot of notes while we're recording these episodes, there's also a lot of off-the-cuff stuff. And the combination of preparedness and spontaneity is one of the things that we think kind of makes us unique as a movie podcast, especially as a movie history podcast. So while a re-recording may have sounded better, the episode overall probably would have suffered. So anyways, this whole disclaimer is just my way of saying, sorry, whoops, we goofed. We don't exactly know what happened, but hopefully it's not too distracting. Hopefully I'm also just not pointing out something, a flaw that you may not have noticed otherwise, but I promise we will do our best to try to figure out what happened and to make sure that the next one sounds even better. But I hope you do enjoy the show anyway, because there's a lot of great information, a lot of great conversation. It's another great entry in our David Fincher series. It just doesn't sound as good as some of the other ones do. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. On with the show.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Oh, you think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. This is the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys that tell you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
You sounded like you had to think about that for a second.
I can tell you why. It's because I knew that I needed the intro, and it wasn't here, and it wasn't on your notes, and so I went to find it, and the first one I opened is The Stepfather, and I copied it from there, and so it goes, I'm one of your hosts. Wait, who am I here?
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, did I type that? Why did I say that? And I'm like, oh, wait, now I remember. Go back and check out The Stepfather if you haven't heard that one.
Sure. If you want to know what Gary's talking about.
That's Gary's convoluted callback to our old episode.
Sure. I'm your co-host, Justin Bishop.
And I'm writer-comedian Mr. Todd A. Davis. Thank you for joining us for part 6 of our series focusing on the works of David Fincher, titled Rules of the Game.
How you doing, Todd? You sound a little hoarse.
Yeah, I've been sick this
weather.
past week and traveling and working. And so my voice is a little shot. I'm here in spirit. I am raring to go. I think I found a couple neat little things to add to the proceedings this week. So I'm super excited.
We'll be the judge of that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what makes me panic. I don't.
So here we are.
Let's get serious.
All right. So after the complexities of Fight Club, not to mention the startling reaction that it got from critics and audiences alike, David Fincher wanted something a little bit more streamlined for his next film. He chose a movie that had a simple premise, a single location, and a very small cast of characters. And, so what could go wrong? Well, this being a David Fincher movie, things were never going to be that easy. And one telling quote in an interview given after the film's release, Fincher said, "Nothing went like it was supposed to on this movie. Literally, everything fucked up." So on this episode, we'll be talking about that. We will be talking about the story behind David Fincher's 2002 home invasion thriller, Panic Room.
4,200 square feet, 4 floors.
Hardwood floors throughout, as many as 6 working fireplaces.
Oh my God, it's huge.
Yes, I don't know if you have live-in help.
No, it's just the two of us. Huh, that's strange. What? Is this room smaller than it should be?
You're the first person to notice. No one from our office had the slightest idea. It's called a panic room.
What?
A safe room. Castle keep in medieval times. Poured concrete walls, buried phone line not connected to the house's main line. You have your own ventilation system and a bank of surveillance monitors that covers nearly every corner of the house.
What's to keep someone from prying open the door?
Steel. Very thick steel.
What's going on? People in the house. Take what you want and get out of my house! What we want is in that room. What is he doing? They're locking us in.
So this is the official spoiler warning, folks. If you have not seen Panic Room, do yourself a favor, hit pause, go watch Panic Room, and then come back for the rest of the discussion. I know I normally do some sort of quote in here. Just imagine that I have Jared Leto's cornrows. So there you go.
No, I'm just imagining you with Dwight Yoakam's mask.
Oh,
yeah.
See, that I could have pulled off, and that would have kept in line with like me doing visual gags on an audio podcast.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. It would have gone really well, as would the cornrows, honestly.
Yeah, true.
So the screenplay for Panic Room was written by David Koepp, who was one of the most successful screenwriters of the last 40 years. Koepp's career as a screenwriter began in the early 1990s. Although it seems to be largely forgotten now, the 1990 thriller Bad Influence, which is directed by Curtis Hanson, starring James Spader and Rob Lowe, it opened to meager box office returns, but positive reviews, and effectively launched Koepp's career as a professional screenwriter. That same year, 2 additional screenplays that he co-wrote under the pseudonym Leonard Moss Jr. were produced. One was called Why Me, which is a crime comedy starring Christopher Lloyd and Christopher Lambert, who is inexplicably getting mentioned once again on our David Fincher series. The other was I Come in Peace, otherwise known as Dark Angel, which is this weirdo sci-fi action movie that I love, starring Dolph Lundgren. That's also a Christmas movie, by the way. If you want another like off-the-wall Christmas movie, I Come in Peace is a good one.
And you go in pieces.
That's it. That's the line.
I just spoiled the ending for everybody, but yeah, you should watch it.
It's a fun movie.
Christopher Lambert and Fincher are destined to work together, and I think we're confirming it.
So. Yeah, it seems to be like meant to be. Just
I was going to say,
connections.
Did either of you guys ever see Bad Influence?
I didn't even really know about it. I mean, I know Curtis Hanson's work. He did LA Confidential. He did 8 Mile, but that's one that I had never really heard of up until fairly recently, actually, because it was being discussed on a podcast I like called You Must Remember This. They were talking about, they did an episode, they did their last couple seasons have been the erotic 80s and the erotic 90s. And on one of those, they were talking about Rob Lowe and his sex tape scandal and all that stuff. And this movie was a big point of discussion during that episode. So that's the only reason I even knew about it.
I've seen Bad Influence. It's one of those rare, I actually have seen Bad Influence, and it's a good movie, but it's definitely like if somebody's covering like erotic thrillers from the 90s, like quintessential. All right. Yeah. It's fun, but it's kind of like, look at these kids. What are they doing?
Well, in 1991, things really started to take a turn for Koepp. That year, he wrote Toy Soldiers, which went on to become, it wasn't a hit, but it did become like a video store and Sunday afternoon cable staple. I mean, that's definitely where I watched it, And then he followed that up with Robert Zemeckis' Death Becomes Her, which was a legitimate hit, like a huge hit. But 1993 was the year that his career really went into overdrive, writing Brian De Palma's Carlito's Way, as well as a little movie called Jurassic Park. Following Jurassic Park, Koepp wrote a string of high-profile screenplays, including Ron Howard's The Paper, The Shadow, the first Mission Impossible movie, which is also Brian De Palma, the first sequel to Jurassic Park, De Palma's Snake Eyes, and Stir of Echoes, which he also directed. So by the dawn of the new millennium, Koepp had proven himself to be one of Hollywood's most reliable hitmakers. His next projects were Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, which of course we have talked about extensively on the show, and also an original screenplay that was inspired by a magazine article that Kep had read about a bunch of incredibly wealthy people constructing impenetrable safe rooms in their homes. And from that seed of an idea, Kep devised the story that would become Panic Room.
He also got stuck in his brownstone elevator, apparently, too. So that was part of it. Just an interesting side note.
That would make me panic.
I'll tell you what makes me panic. I don't know if I'm supposed to fill something in when I say that. I don't even know why I'm saying that. So never mind. Anyway.
Yeah, there should be a second part. There should be a punchline to the joke.
Spiders!
There you go. Every time you say that, just some fear of yours. We're going to really get to know Gary during this episode, I think. What makes him scared? So the completed screenplay for Panic Room was sold to Sony Pictures for a whopping $4 million. And it wouldn't be long before a big-name director was attached. And that director was Ridley Scott, not David Fincher. Not yet. But Ridley Scott, which would have been pretty good, I think, right?
Yeah, I think he pulled it off.
Yeah, but Scott didn't stay attached to it for very long, and I couldn't really find any reasons for why he dropped out. He most likely just decided to pursue another project. If you look at his filmography around this time, he directed Hannibal, Black Hawk Down, and Matchstick Men all within a couple of years of this. So it could have been any one of those, or it could have been none of those. Who knows? But not long after Scott dropped out, David Fincher signed on to the film.
It's really weird because Scott, we talked about in Alien 3 how big of a fan Fincher was of.
Yeah, there have been a lot of Ridley Scott connections on this whole, every episode, it seems like, except for maybe Fight Club.
Yeah, so odd. But I think it's worth mentioning again. I promise it will not go on forever, but just for continuity's sake, we briefly mentioned it on the last episode right before. But, when we last saw Fincher, he'd been waiting on the next thing, but one of those offers came from Sony. But at the first time, it was, Laura Ziskin was this producer on Fight Club, and she had moved away from Fox 2000 in 99 and wanted to get back in the trenches. And she's hooked up with Amy Pascal, who was running Sony. Sorry, I just love all these connections. But anyway, Sony was in a place right at that time, apparently, where they were in kind of a bit of a lull since, I guess it's Pascal had taken over. I was reading that she was getting a lot of criticism during this time because there wasn't anything big happening. I think in 1997 they had this
big tent pole kind of things.
Yeah, it was saying that there was in 97 they had all these like a big blockbuster lineup, but by this time the last few years had not had anything really going for it major. So she was trying to change things up and get some more, I guess, exciting things going. And of course, one of those things was Spider-Man, and here comes Ziskin, and she apparently asked Pascal to give her, quote, the biggest motherfucker you have. And so that's how Ziskin got on Spider-Man. And interestingly enough, I think he was already attached at this point, but they were in talks with David Fincher. And so Ziskin and Fincher had already worked together. But this gives me a chance to point out again why Ziskin had to say no and send Finch off in another direction, because he wanted to do the 10-minute operatic thing opening for Spider-Man. He wanted to do Gwen Stacy's story and skip the origin, start adult Peter Parker, and Sony wanted the origin story. And I was just looking through stuff about that again. And in Fincher's own words, he says, and we might have used this in Spider-Man, so sorry if it's a repeat, but he says, they weren't fucking interested. And I get it. They were like, why would you want to eviscerate the origin story? And I was like, because it's dumb. And he says, and I get it. The origin means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I looked at it, I was like, a red and blue spider. There's a lot of things I could do in my life, but that ain't one of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of glad, obviously we love the Sam Raimi version anyway, but it feels like, I don't know. I love David Fincher, obviously, but I kind of would rather him do more original stuff than to adapt, a comic book.
Right. Yeah. Everything we've seen from him gets a little darker too, that I feel like Spider-Man has to be. So
yeah. I mean, that's part of what we praise Sam Raimi's version for, is that it embraces its bright comic book origins. Yeah, that's one thing we love about it. So yeah, I think David Fincher's version might have been a little bit too dark especially for a very recently post 9/11 New York. We needed a little bit of lightness, I think, after that.
Right. That's a good point.
So when the script for Panic Room slid across his desk, it seemed to be the exact type of thing that Fincher was looking for as his Fight Club follow-up. Fight Club shoot had been a grueling and complex shoot, as we discussed all in our last episode. It lasted for 138 days with 300 scenes shot across 200 locations. Panic Room, on the other hand, was a story set entirely within the confines of a single building with a cast of just 5 people for the majority of the film.
He definitely talks about it in interviews, feeling like on Fight Club, it felt like I just spent like 2 years of my life watching trucks unload.
Yeah.
So he said it was really appealing when we were like, hey, we could do all this in one place.
Right. And the limitations of the location also felt like an exciting challenge for Fincher. He saw it as similar to Hitchcock's Rear Window, which is a film that's also set in like a single apartment building. And Fincher also compares the movie a lot to Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, which is another film about a regular person fighting back against home intruders. In fact, he sold himself to the studio by describing his take on Panic Room as Rear Window meets Straw Dogs, which is kind of accurate. But another film that I actually saw Panic Room compared to a lot is a 1967 thriller called Wait Until Dark that stars Audrey Hepburn as a blind woman who's home alone in her apartment, which is also a brownstone in New York. While criminals are in her home searching for stolen drugs. And I had never seen this movie. I knew a little bit about it because I'd seen some images and some scenes from like especially the last 20 minutes or so of it, which kind of veers a little bit into horror movie territory. So it shows up on some of those like most frightening moments lists and things like that. It's not a horror movie at all though, but it does have some imagery towards the end that I see why it gets lumped in with those. But I decided to watch it last night. One, it's very good. It's based on a stage play, and Audrey Hepburn's husband has accidentally brought home a doll that's stuffed with heroin that he got on a business trip. So these guys are looking for this doll stuffed with heroin. But what's fun is that Audrey Hepburn is blind, so they're kind of playing off that. So the filmmakers are telling a story, and we're seeing everything, but also the criminals are telling another story, trying to play on her disability, like by pretending to be other people and things like that. It's a really good little psychological drama. And Alan Arkin and Richard Crenna from Rambo are 2 of the like 3 criminals in it. So it's got a cool little cast, and it's all like Panic Room. It's all set in this one apartment building. Aside from like the opening scene, everything, the entire film, it's based on a play, so it makes sense. But the entire film is set within this apartment. So plot wise, it's not exactly like Panic Room, but you could definitely see how people can make the comparisons because it's got a lot in common with it, I think.
And what's it called again?
Wait Until Dark. It's on Tubi right now if you want to watch it. If you want to
Nice.
watch it for free on Tubi, that's where I watched it. Yeah.
It sounds like Don't Breathe, but without the turkey baster.
No, there are no turkey basters. But the blind person is the good guy. So
I didn't see Don't Breathe 2. Apparently he's kind of a good guy in that one, I guess.
that's what the biggest problem with that movie is, that how do you make that guy sympathetic after
Right.
after the ending of part 1? How could you possibly try to make that guy sympathetic? It fucks.
He just really missed his daughter.
Well, he went about processing that grief the wrong way.
We're spoiling all the movies here today.
Hey, we didn't spoil. We were vague. We were vague about
that's
it.
True.
So anyway, another appealing aspect of the Panic Room script for Fincher was that it felt vastly different from the films that he had done before. Seven, The Game, Fight Club, these are all kind of character-based thrillers, all of which are kind of defined by their shocking endings, or in the case of Fight Club, at least twist ending. Panic Room, on the other hand, is pretty straightforward. I mean, there are some twists and turns throughout, but nothing like mind-shattering, It was, as Fincher described it, a popcorn movie about survival, one with very little time for character development before the action begins. And now that's not to say that there's not character development. That's not what I mean by that. It's just that the character development in this is actually informed by the action itself. I mean, it kicks into gear very quickly once it gets going. I mean, it does not take long. It doesn't have like a half an hour of setup before the robbers come. It's got maybe 10 minutes of setup, if that. And we find out just enough about these characters early on to care about them and to understand them. I think part of the genius of Pep's script is just how economical it is. Throughout the first few minutes of the movie, we get a literal tour of the house, which kind of quotes the opening, I think, of the tour of the Overlook in The Shining. You kind of get a feel for the whole house and where everything is. Lets us become familiar with it because we're going to be spending the whole film there, so we need to kind of know what's happening where. We also get a little bit of brief exposition about the rumor of the missing fortune of the previous owner. We find out about Meg's marital situation. All this through a little bit of dialogue just in the opening scenes of the movie. Sarah's diabetes, which all of this comes into play later on. But we're not given we don't meet a lot of other people. We don't know the details behind the split in the marriage other than he met a younger woman. But that's really, all we find out because that's all we need to find out before the ball gets rolling.
It really feels like this thing that Fincher calls in some places a narrative freight training.
Yeah, just moving forward, but
Yeah.
not without, he knows, and Kep, as a very good screenwriter, knows how to do it without doing these big exposition dumps. A lot of writers will do that, but he kind of peppers little bits here and there throughout the movie. A lot of it in that first 20 minutes, especially regarding Meg and Sarah and stuff like that. But throughout the film, we're given information through casual conversation, even with the three burglars. That's how you find out that Burnham is the guy who installed the panic room. There's also a kind of a mention that he needs the money for his kids, which gives him motivation and also makes him a little bit more sympathetic because of that. And then you find out also through little bits of conversation, just in passing almost, you find out that Junior is one of the heirs to the guy who used to live there. You also, he tells them a dollar amount, which we later find out is wrong, which increases the tension later on between the three of them. And all of this is just done through little bits of dialogue peppered throughout the conversations in the film, which is really good screenwriting, in my opinion. A lot of the tension in the film comes from the dynamics really between the three criminals more than anything else, because there's this infighting through them, and you don't know, because it becomes pretty clear early on that this simple B&E that they thought they were doing isn't going to be so simple. And there's a lot of tension about how do we handle this from here on. And I think a big part of that tension comes from the appearance of Raul, who wasn't supposed to be there, it seems. Junior just brought him in, and he's the one criminal of the three that we get zero backstory on. We don't know anything about this guy other than his name. We don't even see his face for the first 2/3 of the movie. He's a complete mystery. So he could be that makes him scary, because he could be anybody under that mask. He could be capable of anything. And I just love that. I think that's great screenwriting. I think David Kep knows how to write this type of movie for sure.
For me, in terms of character development, I feel like because David Fincher was setting out to make something more accessible, for lack of a better term, a popcorn movie, like you said, we don't get that as deep character backstory and stuff like that, which for this type of narrative works.
Yeah, you don't need it.
But if you want to feel more attached to those characters, I don't know that having less. It's a delicate balance to walk, because it's what you're trying to do versus what you could potentially do. Maintaining focus on your goals, which we've talked about this before, about judging a movie by how well it accomplished its goals is usually a good indicator on good or bad movie at the end of the day. And it's just kind of, with everything that we've seen so far, and Aliens 3 is a different thing altogether.
Bit of an outlier, yeah.
Yeah. But for The Game and Fight Club, which are so character based, I don't know that I got enough character development to care about them. I got enough to know who they are, but I don't know that I got enough to care. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I feel that's because you don't have a soul.
That's true.
I get the angle you're coming from, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I think you're given just enough about each of them you care enough about them to not want to see them die, because you get the back and forth between the mother and daughter. You see a little bit of their relationships. You see that they're good people. And that's enough to not want them to die.
Right.
The setup of this movie, it feels is enough that it's just the easy scenario is there's a mom and daughter and they're trapped in a house with burglars coming in that could eventually hurt them. So that almost feels like that should be a scenario just initially. Just saying that scenario should be enough to be oh, I hope they're okay.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And that's the type of movie he's trying to make, where that's all you need is to care enough that they're oh, I hope they're okay.
He obviously does care a little bit about the character development, the stuff we were talking about. He definitely, everything I saw, he respects the pace of the script though, and that he said that one of the things that he loved about it was, he said, I think the exact word he used was, he said that Kep wasn't precious about anything. And he talked, you're talking about that narrative freight trading thing again. I like that term, but I know Justin's mom's familiar with trains, so there's that connection.
Wow.
And anyway, I'll tell you what makes me panic. Eyeball violence.
That's true. Gary hates eyeball violence.
Anyway, he appreciated that Kep I think the way he put it was like, he understood like the term that Todd said. He's like, he understands good popcorn filmmaking, but he's doing it in this one with like some B-movie skills. Because in the commentary, he talks a little bit about it, and he's like, and that was fine with me for this. He's like, it's very straightforward. And he's like, to me, B-movies are the most memorable ones. Anyway, I remember Mad Max more than Gandhi. So
right.
That's what he said.
Those are the ones you rewatch over and over, you know? Thinking about the script, as long as we're still talking about the script, one thing that kind of struck me this time. Okay, so Jurassic Park, one of my favorite movies of all time. David Koepp wrote the screenplay based on Michael Crichton's book. But one of the best sequences in Jurassic Park is that scene where the two kids are in this stainless steel kitchen being stalked by the velociraptors. And it feels like with Panic Room, he took that concept and just made a whole movie about it. But instead of kids, we've got a mother and daughter. Instead of dinosaurs, we've got three burglars. But it feels like he took the whole idea of that one scene, that one sequence from Jurassic Park, and just built a whole narrative around it, which I think is great.
There was 100% the scene where Jared Leto was snorting on the window to the Panic Room too, that they had to cut out. So,
I mean, he just showed up to the set like that. So
yeah.
So as he always does, David Fincher had some input in the script, although as far as I can tell, they didn't do any extensive rewrites on the script or bring in any additional screenwriters like they've done on all these other movies so far. Fincher did, however, work to crank up the meanness of Koepp's script. For instance, as originally written, towards the end of the story, Sarah gets slapped by one of the burglars in the script. But in Fincher's version, if you remember, she gets punched square in the face, and she gets punched hard. Like, he nails her. He really does. Fincher said he, quote, wanted to see her get really smashed. I wanted people to know this was not a movie that was going to play nice. And this is a moment that, if you remember it happens pretty late in the film, just as things are really escalating. And Raoul, who is the most sadistic of the three burglars, is truly unhinged by this point in the movie. He's wounded. He's like a wounded feral animal at this point. He doesn't even seem to be really concerned about the money anymore. He's just like mad. He's just pissed off and mean. So you really do believe that he's capable of anything. So when he punches Sarah, you can kind of believe that it's not like a huge leap in logic to think that he could murder Meg or Burnham or anybody. I think the husband is still around by this point, so he could like kill anybody, because we've already seen him murder Junior by this point, so we know that he's got it in him. So a little slap in the face wasn't going to be true to the kind of monster that he's become by this point. I think David Fincher recognized that. Another change that Fincher made also involved Raoul. In the script, there's all this talk about the reinforced steel door to the Panic Room, how nobody gets caught in it. You know, we see these little lasers that act as safety precautions to prevent someone's arm or leg getting smashed in it. Well, Fincher read that and thought, how can you have 9 people talking about how dangerous the door is, and then we don't sever any limbs? It's like the opposite of the Chekhov's gun thing. You guys familiar with Chekhov's gun? It is not a Star Trek reference, Todd.
I mean, it could be.
Yeah, it'd be Chekhov's phaser, I guess, if you did that. But the Chekhov's gun, if you don't know, it's a storytelling principle that says that every element of the story must be necessary. So basically, what it says is that, you know, if you're going to introduce a gun in the first act, then that gun has to go off in the third act. Otherwise, there's no point in showing the gun in the first place.
If you, for some reason, show a gun above the fireplace, somebody better be using that gun by the third
right.
act.
Exactly. I mean, and Fincher knew that, because remember, he talked about that in The Game, how when you show a close-up and focus on something, you know that it's going to come into play later. So he deliberately didn't do that in The Game, because he didn't want to clue audiences in on what the machinations of the game itself. So he deliberately avoided doing that. But here he's like, well, if we're not going to like chop somebody's limbs off with this Panic Room door, why even bother showing the laser and the ability to stop and all that? Otherwise, that doesn't make sense. Wouldn't it be more fun to like chop a dude's hand off or something?
Yes. The answer is always yes.
Todd,
I'll tell you what makes me panic: getting my hand chopped off. Like that.
So when Fincher brought this idea to Koepp, the writer's reasoning was that if someone gets their hand or leg caught in the door, they would just sit in the background for the rest of the movie whimpering and crying. And Fincher said, Well, yeah, what's wrong with that? Fincher loves to torment his characters, and this, I think, is another ingenious piece of input by Fincher because it plays into Raoul's ruthlessness in that last act. He does spend a large chunk of the movie writhing in pain after getting his hand smashed in the door, but it fuels his rage in the final act and makes his anger more believable. And when they went in to film this sequence, by the way, Fincher actually wanted to do a shot of the door opening to show Raoul's finger pieces falling to the floor, like crushed grapes, is what he wanted. And they actually had finger nubs made for it by the effects department, but they ended up not using them because, as Fincher describes them, they look like dachshund turds. so they went a different direction.
Which hand does he smash? Is it his left?
I don't remember. I can't remember.
Because I was trying to think, because when he punches Sarah, it is a shock.
Yeah.
I was wondering if it was the same hand, because I was like, that is another like subtle way to show like his ferocity and just, where he's at psychologically by the end of this night. Oof. And I mean, the crunch of his hand, like, yeah, it's a neat moment, and they pull it off really well.
It completely changes.
Couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
It changes Raoul too, like because he's like up until that point, or like
he's
around this point,
kind of playing it cool, and
he's
trying to be
stoic and kind of creepily standing in the background all the time. He'll say like one word here and there, not much, and then by the time all this happens, he's just become like this maniac, and he's like lost control, and he's just nuts. Talking about Fincher, like the Chekhov's gun thing again, it really made me think just now too about how we're talking about how economical everything is in the screenplay or whatever. I mean, just how it also zooms in on like it has those scenes where it like shows you everything you need to see that's going to come and play later. Like even the wine glass, like she's been drinking, and like and then like there's the basketball, I think they kick on the stairs, like it shows it sitting on the stairs ahead of time, and like there's like all these like little things that like focuses on for a second as it's going through,
kind of telegraphing things without you knowing that it's being telegraphed.
Right.
Well, there's another sequence in the script that Fincher wanted to change or maybe even take out entirely. He actually hated the sequence where Meg tries to grab her phone and then accidentally knocks it further away, and she hits the lamp and knocks it over and all that stuff. He just, I think, thought it was a little cliche. But Kep was able to convince him that the scene works for a movie like this. And Fincher eventually relented and left the scene in. But he said, if I'm going to leave it in, I'm going to film it entirely in slow motion. He actually said, if you're going to pander, which I love. I love this guy. But anyway, I think it turned out to be one of the most intense moments in the film. So the pandering kind of worked on me. I think that's a fantastic sequence. And part of it is because it's in slow motion. The way that Fincher films it and edits it makes it like very intense. It's really cool, I think, because you see, and with no noise either, because you see the three robbers like on the other floor, they're talking, but you don't hear them, but you see their reaction to the sound of the lamp. Like it's really good filmmaking there, I think.
And it's kind of, even without the sound, you in your head,
you know what's going on.
Yeah, you sort of populate that with your own like sound bank in your own head of like, oh, it made this noise, and you do find yourself kind of creeping along, or like almost like, oh, you're so close to it.
Yeah.
I feel like it's moments like that make me care about the character more than the dialogue stuff of like, reaching. It's like when you see someone stub their toe on the coffee table, like, that hurts.
Yeah.
You've been there, you've done that. I don't know.
I'll tell you what makes me panic: paper cuts. Right. Right. Yeah. On the tip of your penis.
Oh, Jesus.
Scary.
Has that happened to you?
Yeah, I was gonna say that begs the question.
Just the thought of it makes me panic.
How much time are you spending thinking about paper cuts on wieners?
That legitimately just came to me right now. I was like, where would be the worst place for a paper cut? Go-to was in between your like thumb and your pointer finger, maybe
between your toes,
or between your toes would work, but tip of your penis also. But maybe to your point about stubbing your toe, more people could relate to the between the toes. So maybe that's what I should have gone.
Sure, I'm really glad we're talking about this.
It's good. It's quality podcasting.
So Fincher's original concept was to shoot the entire film in complete darkness. He said, like floating eyes in the dark kind of thing. But initial tests proved this to be unfeasible. And then the production considered filming inside an existing townhouse, but they quickly realized that they need to build their own 4-story brownstone in order to accommodate all of their technical equipment, especially considering the complex camera movements that Fincher wanted to use. And with the help of production designer Arthur Max, who had also held that same title on Seven, he's another Ridley Scott guy, remember? They designed and built the brownstone entirely on a soundstage in Los Angeles at a cost of $6 million.
Yeah, it goes for like double that in New York right now. So like at least monthly.
I love real estate jokes.
You know what makes me panic? Inflation. What was I gonna say? Oh, Ridley Scott. Yeah. So Arthur Max was coming off of Gladiator. So I always wondered, like, if that's how's that feel if you're him?
Probably less exciting.
Like, yeah, I was gonna say, oh yeah, I just did Gladiator. What's next? I was gonna just build like a little house.
I'm just building a townhouse.
I could do that. Okay,
yeah, I guess so.
Sure.
Do that with my eyes closed. Well, building the townhouse out on a soundstage like this gave Fincher near total control over every minute detail of the production and allowed him to meticulously plan out every single shot, every single camera move. His idea was to have a camera that was completely unencumbered by the laws of physics, where it would just fly through the house in ways that seem impossible. He wanted the camera to be free in a way that the characters are not. The people can't get through the wall, and then the camera goes right through it, which he says, I think there's something about that. This is a quote from him. I think there's something about that tells the audience, scream all you want. No one can hear you. You can only watch.
This is an interesting idea because, well, you're at least visually, you're kind of omniscient. And the way that the house is built is you could not get the shots that he gets in like a regular house.
Not at all.
So
yeah.
like, yeah, you can remove walls, poke holes, and basically angle the cameras any which way you want to. It's like a cam girl's dream house. Like we could just whatever you want to do, anywhere you want to be. And by the way, they even use CGI sometimes to get through stuff, and it's better than most of the CGI we see now. So
yeah, it's honestly pretty impressive.
It kind of turns every wall into the fourth wall, giving everybody those weird angles and different movements. Takes you really into the house.
So to plan these shots, Fincher hired a company called the Pixel Liberation Front, who he'd also used on Fight Club. And they used a process called photogrammetry, which uses still images grafted over a computer-generated model of the set, which crafted a sort of full-scale interactive 3D virtual space in which Fincher and a cinematographer could choreograph the intricate camera movements. And it kind of works almost like a complex CGI storyboard, essentially. So Fincher met with his pre-visualization team, every single day throughout pre-production, creating the entire film. I mean, like every single moment, every single shot, every single, character walking from this point to another. They pre-vised all of this during this pre-production period. In the behind-the-scenes documentary that's on the DVD, we see footage of some of these meetings, and watching Fincher give notes to the team is honestly sort of insane because he obsesses over every single little thing in every single scene.
I can see why he would be so obsessed in this because, part of it is in this movie, the house has got to be as much of a character as anybody else in some ways. And sure, you could just jump, just cut from room to room and stuff like that. But it's pretty clever to really go through the house and establish like the layout of the whole place so that later when shit's going down, it's like, how you kind of have an idea of how it's all connected. And that kind of builds the tension, I think, especially that phone scene you're talking about, knowing where the burglars are at in relation to Jodie Foster. And I don't know. I just see that contributing to it, or at least the plan would be that.
And it creates some distance too, so that like when the burglars are talking, or when Meg and Sarah are talking, and when they're in the panic room, you can understand why like the burglars don't hear them, or vice versa, because it's a 4-story building, and they're up on the 3rd or 4th floor, and the burglars are on the bottom floor, like they wouldn't hear them. So by establishing the geography of the house, you're really able to understand why that is. There are no leaps in logic that you have to make to understand. Well, why aren't they just talking to each other? Now, no live action film had ever been as extensively pre-visualized as Panic Room was at the time. Probably not since either, because pre-visualization is typically used for animated movies or for big action scenes or effects heavy sequences in films, but never entire movies. It's not necessary to really do an entire movie this way. But you see, Fincher seemed to be approaching the film like a mathematical equation, or kind of like it was an animated film, only using live actors on a real set. You know, an animated film, a director can make the character go wherever they want and do exactly what he wants them to do. And Fincher, being the control freak that he is, that obviously seemed very appealing. So I think when he got the idea to do previs, to do the entire movie this way, he's like, oh, now I can make the exact movie that I want. Not thinking that like later on, that could lead to some issues where you're having to actually deal with human beings who are fallible and not perfect and not going to do every single little move exactly the way you wanted to do the first time. So this obsession with pre-planning, it might have felt right at the time, but in hindsight, it did contribute to some of the issues that he had when it came time to actually shoot the thing. And Fincher, you know, I'm sure you have too, Gary, but I've read a lot of like interviews with David Fincher over the course of this series, and he has gone on record many times saying that the planning stage is what he enjoys the most about directing. So you kind of understand why he got in the weeds on it a little bit, where he just kind of got obsessive about it. And one of these quotes, he says, I enjoy reading a script that you can see in your head, and then I enjoy the casting, and I enjoy the rehearsal, and I enjoy all the meetings about what it should be, what it could be, what it might be. And then from that point on, I hate every single thing about it. He's called directing, referred to it as masochism. He's like, if you're a masochist, if you want to be a director, he's like, it's awful. It's fucking terrible. I hate it. He likes everything else. He loves planning it, but the shoot he hates. I mean, granted, I will say this is in interviews leading up to this point. He could have changed his tune after this.
I definitely jotted down another quote from him where he said, I'd rather be prepared and bored than excited and hemorrhaging cash and looking like a fucking moron. So, yeah. I mean, he does say in the commentary, he does describe still the previs as being invaluable. And one place that they definitely go through that at is in that where the burglars first get in and Jodie Foster has to go wake up Kristen Stewart and
sure. I mean, big sequences like that, you would use previs anyway, but like he's doing, you know, a character walking through the kitchen and he's prevising every single moment and putting all the details in the previs as well, like the placement of mirrors in the scene and things like that, just because he wants every little shot. He wants to know what the reflection is going to look like from this angle. And, you know, like he wants every single thing in that. If you watch that section of the DVD, you know, there's like, oh, she should turn her head at this point, you know, like with their they got the little CGI character and he's like, no, she should turn her head a second later. And, you know, yeah, that's great. But you doing that on the previs doesn't mean that's going to happen in real life. Now, granted, it will eventually, but he'll have to do 45 takes to get it.
Yeah, I could definitely see like little things like that you can't imagine. I don't know, matters, but like that scene where the burglars break in and they're running. I know that was like, you know, he talks about it's like if we've got to change a wall or something, that's like 45 minutes or something. So we need to know exactly where everybody needs to be and exactly what everybody's doing. So, and I think in that scene, there's like, I think it said like 94 cuts over 2 minutes and something I was watching. And so everybody has to be like in the right place at the right time, and they're trying to just do it. Everybody is like kind of choreographed in what's going on. I could see where it's valuable, and then also like what you're talking about, where it's or it can be a hindrance to what you're doing.
When you do it as extensively as he did, it makes it a little more convoluted than it needs to be, which is a lesson that he is going to learn throughout the course of making this movie. So he knows that he relied on it a little bit too much by the end of this whole thing.
Random side note, I did see that they brought in a security expert to come in and help with the panic room part of things and like how that would be all set up. Because he wanted to be as real as possible, although this panic room is a little more elaborate. I think he said he wanted it to be more like, yeah, he said, you know, like it needs to be something more like Hitler's bunker or something like that, you know. The only deal with the consultant is like the panic room can't fail. That was the one thing they had to agree to. I guess, I don't know. I guess you get your money that way. So you can't be having your panic rooms fail on screen.
Yeah.
And David Fincher does not have a panic room, by the way. I saw him get asked that in one interview, and he said something like, what did he say? Something like, I hope to never do anything important enough or antagonistic enough to have to worry about hiding from somebody in a panic room or something.
So while the set for the townhouse was being constructed, Fincher began assembling his cast. In the lead roles of mother and daughter, Meg and Sarah, Fincher cast Nicole Kidman and Hayden Panettiere, although Panettiere would drop out of the production a few weeks before filming began. And one report that I read said that it was due to a lack of chemistry with Kidman. Although in his commentary, Fincher said, he doesn't say her name, but he says that the original actress was, quote, very feminine and girlish and all those things and just irritated me beyond belief. So,
Kirby.
so, filming was pushed back by about a month while they hunted for a replacement, which they eventually found when Fincher saw an audition tape for Kristen Stewart, along with a Porsche commercial that she had done. He really liked her, what he said was her tomboyish, androgynous quality, and felt that she had a realness to her acting that most child actors didn't.
She really got colored by Twilight. Like, I don't give poor Kristen Stewart enough credit, because she's actually in a bunch of stuff I like.
She's a fantastic actress. She's incredible, yeah. I think a lot of people don't, or I think it's changed now, but I think for a while people just thought of her as the girl from Twilight. But everything that she's done, not everything, but most everything she's done outside of Twilight has been very good, or at least she's very good in it, even if the movie is so-so. I think she's one of the best actresses we've got, one of the most interesting actresses we've got working right now.
I think it's really
Robert
weird,
Pattinson too.
Yeah, no, he turned out okay too. I don't get why you let your kids wear like a Sid Vicious shirt. Like, is that somebody they should be idolizing? That's just weird parenting.
I mean, maybe she's just a Sex Pistols fan.
Yeah, maybe.
It is weird that it's specifically a Sid Vicious shirt, not a Sex Pistol shirt, though.
I feel like that's somebody you should talk about as they get a little older.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe Meg was an old punk
I'll tell you what I panic about.
Okay.
Uncomfortable conversations with your parents.
Thank you, Todd.
That's good.
That's Todd's cold medicine talking or something over there.
Mm-hmm.
Todd, you can just hit mute again if you want.
Okay.
So, while there are a handful of other small roles in the film, most of whom only appear in a single scene, the remaining big roles to fill were those of the three burglars, Burnham Jr. and Raoul. So the character of Burnham was originally written as a guy who designed the panic room, but Fincher didn't buy that this guy could get talked into breaking into a house. So they turned him into more of a blue-collar kind of guy, the guy who installs the systems. And the role went to Forrest Whitaker, who really brings a pathos to the role. And despite being a big, imposing guy, which he is, there's this level of humanity that he brings to the character that's deeper than what you would get from a typical heavy in a movie like this. And also a little fun side note is that Forrest Whitaker was actually briefly courted as a possible director for the film after Ridley Scott dropped out.
I'm glad that he is in this movie. He's very, very good. I like Forrest Whitaker. Apparently in the script, David Koepp had written it as an unpleasant, white-collar, compulsive gambler. Koepp's actual quote was Humphrey Bogart in one of his less pleasant roles. And so... Which is not Forrest Whitaker, not what I think of as Forrest Whitaker.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But David Fincher actually knew Forrest Whitaker because he worked for propaganda films directing music videos. And
Forrest Whitaker did?
Yeah, I did not know that. So I guess that's maybe, why he was part of this or something.
Well, I knew that he had directed stuff before, but I did not know that he had done music videos.
And Fincher says he likes what Forrest Whitaker brings. In the commentary, he says something like a worn quality. He wears it and it becomes like an old glove on him. He's not interested in sparkle. He's interested in making something look like it's gotten there through years of abuse. And I like that description.
That's good.
He also talks a little bit about Ghost Dog in the commentary and just how great Forrest Whitaker is in that. So
he is great in it. Great movie.
I love
the character.
Ghost Dog.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Yeah.
The character of Raoul was originally written as a giant, scary, hulking guy, but Fincher liked the idea of making him a wiry, mean kind of ex-con white trash kind of guy. That's how Fincher described him. And he had remembered Dwight Yoakam's performance in Sling Blade a few years earlier and thought that he would be perfect for it.
Nothing screams Raoul like Dwight Yoakam.
Yeah, I think Dwight Yoakam, was kind of amused that Fincher wanted to cast him as a character named Raoul. I also think it's really funny that they didn't just change the character's name after casting Dwight Yoakam to something that wasn't Raoul, but they just went with it. I like that they just went with it. I don't know why. It's funny to me.
It's weird. You got Jared Leto with his cornrows and Dwight Yoakam is Raoul.
Yeah.
It's a little odd.
Yeah, so Jared Leto, he had a small role in Fight Club, but Fincher cast him because, as Fincher put it, he's perfect for it, isn't he? If there's a guy you want to see get his face burned off, it's him, which I love. I think it's wonderful. I love that Fincher's just giving him shit. But I actually like Jared Leto in this movie, and I do not like Jared Leto in a lot of stuff because he's insufferable to me. And he almost was insufferable in this. I mean, when he showed up, apparently originally he showed up like in full on gangster attire. He had gold teeth on and everything. And David Fincher was like, that's a bit too much. Let's dial it back a little bit. So they went with just the cornrows. Because I also have to imagine that if Jared Leto had been allowed to be in the movie in that getup, he would have had some terrible accent or something that probably would have just grated on my nerves and probably grated on Fincher's nerves, honestly, for the whole movie.
He definitely was looking for somebody he said had trust funditis. And Leto fixed that role. I don't know if he's being political, but in I think it was the commentary where I saw it, he actually talks about Jared Leto's like pranks and stuff like that. And Fincher says he's a fan of his sense of humor.
Fincher's got a pretty dark, weird sense of humor anyway. So maybe he had not escalated to dead rats and shit that he did on as the Joker or whatever. Wasn't he mailing dead rats to people or something?
Yeah, it was like weird shit like that. Yeah.
So aside from the 5 main actors, the other most significant role is Meg's ex-husband, Steven, who's played by Patrick Beauchot, who's an actor that I'm not terribly familiar with. He's a Belgian guy. Most of his films are French films that haven't received very big, if any, releases in the United States. He was, however, in Dario Argento's Phenomena as a police inspector, and he plays the lead henchman to Christopher Walken's villain in the James Bond movie A View to a Kill.
Yeah, I remember him from a TV show in the late 90s, early 2000s called The Pretender. Did either of you guys watch that show?
I saw some episodes here and there. I remember it, but I didn't watch it like regularly. No. Was he a regular character on there?
Yeah,
like a regular cast member?
Yeah, so there's this guy who's a genius, and he's raised in this government facility. He escapes, and the way he sort of evades recapture is he's able to pretend to have all these different jobs, and because he's a genius, he absorbs knowledge super quickly, and he's able to, just slip right into any role. Beauchot and another actress, her name I forget her name at the moment, but they're on his tail for the whole thing. So it was a fun show. But Beauchot was like the main character's like father figure and teacher and mentor. So him in the role of like the hunter of his sort of surrogate son, it created a neat dynamic.
Now's the time, I guess, to tell everybody about our spin-off podcast about the show The Pretender. Every episode breakdown
in chronological order.
Yeah, of course.
Yep, for fans new and old. Yep.
Well, Fincher had originally toyed with the idea of casting Mel Gibson as Meg's husband because he liked the idea of audiences seeing Mel Gibson show up and thinking, oh my God, Mel Gibson's here, everything's going to be okay, only to watch him just get the shit beat out of him from that point on in the movie, which honestly, I love that idea. I wish that he would have done that. I think that's hilarious.
It would be fun to see it too subvert your expectations. Yeah, that would be great.
Fincher's pal, Andrew Kevin Walker, has a small role in the movie as the sleepy neighbor. Is what he's credited as. He's the guy who, he's across in the other building when they're trying to do SOS or whatever on the flashlight. That's Andrew Kevin Walker, who, of course, had written Seven and had done rewrites on Fight Club and The Game. And he didn't actually do any rewrites on this one, but he just kind of did the role as a favor to Fincher and to Koepp, because you may remember David Koepp and Walker are really good friends, and Koepp is the one that helped Walker get his foot in the door as a screenwriter after he'd written Seven.
He says he teased Koepp a lot about it, though. It was like, oh, he's here because he's gonna rewrite.
He's just like fucking with him.
Yeah, he's gonna change your script a little.
The character of Lydia Lynch, who clues in Meg to the availability of the house, is played by Anne Magnuson. And if you're wondering why I'm mentioning her,
she's probably on Star Trek.
She's on Star Trek, baby. 2 episodes of Picard, she plays an admiral who tells Jean-Luc to get fucked.
Right. She says that. Did she say the words "get fucked" on Star Trek?
Not so much, but you can kind of see it in her face. Picard shows up and is like, hey, it's after his retirement. He shows up, he needs a ship, and he basically was like, give me a ship. And she's like, no.
Nice.
She's like, you're famous and stuff. Why don't you just head back to the vineyard?
She's also in Tank Girl, which I just watched a couple days ago.
Yeah, she is.
The realtor at the beginning of the movie, it's a guy named Ian Buchanan. And
Yeah, he's in Twin Peaks.
yeah, and Fincher already knew him, but he said he had literally just accepted the job, and he was on a plane and saw Ian Buchanan across from him and was like, "I know that guy." And then he remembered they had worked together. He had acted in one of Fincher's music videos,
Huh.
which, by the way, I looked it up. It was "Who Is It" by Michael Jackson in 1993.
Excellent.
And so Fincher said he just leaned over and was like, "Hey, do you want to do this movie? I need somebody to be the real estate agent or whatever." And the realtor, he said, I told him it's way beneath your dignity, but you'd be perfect for it. And he accepted. And that was the first casting part, I guess.
Yeah, on an airplane.
Yeah.
So once filming began, it became pretty clear almost immediately that this shoot was not going to be the walk in the park that Fincher may have envisioned. They weren't too far into the shoot when cinematographer Darius Kanji was fired from the film. Kanji, you remember, he had worked with Fincher in the past. I think he was on Seven, right? He was on Seven. So the general feeling among those involved in the making of the film is that Fincher's meticulous planning on the film proved to be too inflexible for Kanji, leaving no room for spontaneity. Fincher kind of hinted at this while doing press for the film, explaining that Darius, this is a quote from Fincher, he says, "Darius is not a light meter jockey. He wanted to be part of the decision-making process. This movie did not allow that, and it was incredibly frustrating for him." So Kanji was replaced by Conrad W. Hall, who'd been Kanji's camera assistant. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because he is the son of Oscar-winning cinematographer Conrad Hall, who was responsible for shooting movies like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Cool Hand Luke, and then later on he did, American Beauty and The Road to Perdition. He's an incredible cinematographer. So about 20 days into the shoot, they had another setback. They were filming a scene. Nicole Kidman was shooting a sequence where she's running up the stairs and her leg gave out and she collapsed in pain. They took an x-ray and the x-ray revealed a hairline fracture under one of her knee joints, which was the result of an injury that she'd sustained while filming Moulin Rouge a few months earlier. So with that sort of injury, Kidman was forced to drop out of the film. Fincher actually tried to convince the studio to just shut the whole movie down and collect the insurance money because they would have made about a $3 million profit on it. But the studio wasn't having it. They really liked the script. They really wanted this movie, and they were willing to spend the extra money to find a new actress for the lead role.
That surprises me that he was going to have him just shut the whole thing down.
Yeah, it was surprising to me too after all the planning that he did on it. But yeah, he apparently, he said it. I've seen him say it in interviews that he's like, I just told them to shut it down, but they're like, nah, let's just keep rolling.
Well, it makes you wonder, like, if he kind of, I mean, at this point, he's not a kid, and he could see stuff coming down the road. And I wonder if he had that. I wonder if he had a sense of, you know what?
We've already lost our cinematographer. Now we've lost our lead actress. Like, this is already not going well. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, if we pull the plug now, we'll still be in the green. Like,
yeah.
And plus it kind of, him saying that kind of puts the onus on the studio of just kind of like, hey, look, I think we should, pull the plug.
And then if anything else goes wrong, he can be like, well, I told you so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Todd may have nailed it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. So while the search for a new lead actor went on, Fincher continued to film scenes around the Meg character. But with the threat of a looming strike, not just from the Writers Guild, but also the Screen Actors Guild, Fincher needed to find a replacement fast. Because if they didn't find someone soon, and they got shut down because of the strikes, the entire production could, it would be shut down, which could potentially cost the studio an extra $10 million if that happened. So they started considering different actresses. They considered actresses like Sandra Bullock, Angelina Jolie, Robin Wright, all of whom I think would have been pretty good in the role. But it was Jodie Foster who'd eventually play the part. Foster had been scheduled to serve as the jury president at the 2001 Cannes Film Festival, but made a somewhat controversial decision to step down from that role because that's a big deal to be named not just a member of the jury, but the president of the jury at the Cannes Film Festival. So it kind of created some waves when she decided to step down from that. But she did that because she wanted to do Panic Room. She really liked the idea of doing it. And remember, she wanted to work with Fincher back on The Game. So she'd been wanting to work with Fincher. But once she signed on, she had a little over a week to prepare before she joined the shoot.
According to Fincher, I think this was in the commentary, he said that they had actually looked at Foster in the first place, even before Nicole Kidman, but she wasn't available because she was
she was directing something, right?
she was in pre-production for something, Flora Plum.
Yeah, it was a movie she was going to
and-
direct.
Yeah, and then after the injury, that they had when they were looking at people, he was just like, was Foster still doing this movie or whatever? And they had realized it was shut down.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, so maybe there's a chance that that's what led to like reaching out. And then of course she had to step down for this role. But I think it's important to note just to, it is that injury with Nicole Kidman. Apparently she was great on the set and everybody liked her. Like I just saw like a variety thing where it was like actors on actors, and it was Kristen Stewart and Nicole Kidman.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
they were talking about Panic Room and like how Kristen Stewart like loved Nicole Kidman and like how cool she was to her, and like they
Yeah.
had bonded all up until the time that
Yeah,
she
there
had
was
to leave.
nothing like, there was no animosity at all. I mean, this was simply a practical decision. Like she couldn't physically do the movie. And she does have a small little cameo in the movie.
Yeah, she does.
She's got a little voice cameo in the movie where she plays the ex-wife on the phone when Jodie Foster calls her ex-husband. That's Nicole Kidman's voice. So, they got her in there in the movie a little bit. Because I'm sure she was probably pretty bummed that she had to leave the movie. This was a big deal.
Yeah. I would, what makes me panic? Fracturing my leg. I don't want that to happen.
I don't either. I don't want that to happen for you, Gary.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, plugging Foster into the role was a little bit more complicated than just substituting one actress for another. For example, a lot of those scenes that they had meticulously pre-visualized had to be reconsidered because Kidman is about a foot taller than Jodie Foster. So if they'd constructed a shot with Kidman in mind, the framing of the character would be completely different once you put Foster in the scene. Like they talk about some scenes where there's like a banister that when they were shooting it with Nicole Kidman, she was above the banister based on where the camera was setting. But once they put Foster in like that same spot in the same scene, her face was covered up because she's a foot shorter, so things like that they had to reconsider. So all this planning that Fincher did all of a sudden is kind of biting him in the ass.
It was like all in the Panic Room, the lights that keep the door from shutting or whatever. It was like set up for Nicole Kidman, but when Foster was there, she was like exactly the height that they were like shining right in her eyeballs.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, and Foster's presence is also very different from Kidman's. I mean, anyone who's seen either of their movies can know that. So certain scenes had to be rewritten to fit what Foster brought to the screen. There were, lines of dialogue that didn't fit with her in the role, and scenes that just played very differently with her than they may have with Kidman. As Fincher puts it, he says, Jodie Foster can play anything, but helpless is asking a lot of the audience to believe because she just isn't. The character was originally written more helpless. So, which he's got a good point there. I mean, what do you think the film would have been like with Kidman in this role instead of Jodie Foster? I mean, I think Jodie Foster's great in it, but he is right that Jodie Foster's not going to be very believable as a helpless person, whereas Nicole Kidman has a little bit more of like a delicacy to her, I guess is the right word, that would make that work a little bit better. I mean, whereas Jodie Foster seems more of like, I'm going to take charge and, get out of the situation. So what do you guys think? Do you think, I personally think this is a really good movie. Do you think assuming you like the movie, do you think it would have been as good with Kidman in the role? Or it would have just been very different, do you think?
I think you're already at the point here that Jodie Foster also reminds you of Clarice, that she's already taken down Buffalo Bill. So
that's true.
I could see that you're like, Jodie Foster's more of a badass, but
she's already done Contact too. So she's already met aliens as well at this point.
Yeah. So she's busy, but
I could see, I mean, even going back to like Sandra Bullock or Robin Wright, like I was like,
yeah, I think Sandra Bullock especially would have been very good in the role.
Yeah, I was like, to be honest, I think Sandy would have been really great in this, but
also a very different presence than Jodie.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms, I mean, just Jodie Foster and Kidman, like, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe because this situation comes across very, she's not stupid.
Not
and I feel like being put in the helpless situation, I don't know if that leans toward the character or away from the character, or does the character fit in that scenario. I feel like Nicole Kidman's energy might have, I think, might have been better in this scenario. Because
It's
again,
weird.
like we do think of, I do think of Jodie Foster as Clarice. Like it's hard not to. And it's like she's so smart and so capable. You think, oh, she's stuck in a room with, a couple of, bumbling bad guys. It's like, no, she's got this. But I feel like there would be more at stake, or the stakes would be higher with somebody like Nicole Kidman. I don't know.
It's tough because I really like the movie already, but
Mhm.
the more I sit here and think about it, the more I'm like, I don't know, maybe it would be better with Nicole Kidman, honestly. Like,
Maybe, but
because
like
she,
also you got to think, would like Nicole Kidman be believable as a character? Like, would she have the balls to do the fire thing when they're pumping the
that's
gas
true.
into it? Or but that's like, to me, that's more believable with someone like Jodie Foster. You know?
She comes across as
Yeah.
tougher and more resourceful. So
Mhm.
yeah, like you could believe that there's a background here that, yeah, you're right. Like
Yeah, that's
Jodie,
true.
I'm, I don't know.
Or smacking
There's
the
like
guy in
a,
the face with a sledgehammer, which she also does. Like, like
Yeah,
I
there's
could, I
that.
could, I could, I could buy Jodie Foster doing that more than Nicole Kidman. I
well,
think
the way I was thinking of it was like, would it be more shocking that Nicole
that's true
Kidman
as well.
finally
Yeah,
gets to that
Mm,
point and
yeah,
she's doing that? But
yeah.
because you think of Jodie Foster as tough and resourceful,
Mhm.
and Nicole Kidman, like you said, has like a little, I
She
don't
would
know.
have to find that toughness within her more so than it already being present, I think.
Right. Yeah.
No,
watching her character arrive at that point would be fascinating.
it would be and satisfying because it's always
Mm,
fun to see that happen in a movie. So either way, it would be a vastly different movie, I think, with Nicole Kidman in the role. And I like both of them. I love Nicole Kidman. I love Jodie Foster. But as Fincher said, they do bring very different energy to their roles. So it would have been, even if every camera shot would have been exactly the same as it is now, it would have played very differently with a different actress in the role.
mm.
So with the shoot finally able to resume with Foster in the lead, they get going, and then about 5 weeks into shooting, there's yet another setback. So one day on set, Foster pulled Fincher to the side. Fincher and his producer, what's her name? His wife, Gary. I can't ever remember how to pronounce that
Yeah,
name.
it's Cian Chafin.
Cian Chafin. I can't ever remember the pronunciation on that because it's a tough one for my for my brain to process. But
I'm 85 to 90% sure that was correct.
okay, all right, that's better. That's pretty good odds for me. So Jodie Foster pulls her and Fincher to the side, and she tells them that she just found out that she's pregnant. So after some discussion, Foster and Fincher, they elected to keep filming, and they just kind of adjusted the shooting schedule and Foster's wardrobe to hide her pregnancy. So while the film was shot almost entirely in sequence, which is very rare to begin with, but when you're shooting in a single location, I guess it makes sense. They did put an emphasis on wide shots early on, where you would see Foster, completely, like her head to toe before her pregnancy started showing. And then they shot close-ups later where they could frame her to hide her torso so they could hide the pregnancy. And then for any of the more intense action scenes, they used Foster's stunt double, a stunt actress named Jill Stokesbury. So at one point in the film, Meg does put on a sweater, you'll remember, and it was because it was becoming a little bit too difficult to hide Foster's pregnancy in the singlet that she was wearing. Or as Fincher put it in the commentary, quote, "There's a certain point where the titty fairy had done too much work."
That is apparently, by the way, a Robin Williams joke. He credits him in the
Yes, he does credit Robin Williams with that joke, which thank you for crediting the creator of that, the titty fairy joke.
the titty fairy. Yeah, you want Robin Williams. If he's remembered for one thing, it should be the titty fairy.
The term titty fairy.
But yeah, I don't know. It's funny you mentioned Cian, and I tried to look up more stuff about her with this movie if she had anything special. The one thing I saw was like little side story that she told about this, because she was describing the process with Fincher and how they work so well together. And it's like every once in a while there may be an idea that he doesn't have, and then she'll like, she's talking about being a producer and being able to know, like, when is this an idea like he says no to that I could bring up again later, and when is the one that like he's not for, and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And like when he says it should take this many days, I should say it actually is going to take this many days and stuff. But in one of the stories, she was saying, she was like, I actually was talking to somebody at Sony when we were doing Panic Room, and they were setting up like how many days this is going to be. And I told them 80. And they were like, how? We're at 80 right now on Spider-Man. Like, why are you at 80 on Panic Room? And she was like, who do you think's lying to you? She had predicted like Spider-Man's going to go way over that. And,
Yeah.
But
Panic Room went
apparently,
over that too.
yeah, I was about to say, but apparently not with the realization that was going to happen here too.
Yeah. Well,
I'll tell you what makes me panic. Nipples in National Geographic.
Wow, we're just gonna have to really edit a lot of Todd's medicine-fueled ramblings out of this episode.
Yeah, I don't know why. That was like my first porn. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know. That was apropos of absolutely nothing as well, except we were talking about titty fairies, I guess.
Yeah, there you go.
Todd needs a nap.
You should have just said
somebody needs a nap.
It's probably me.
Maybe you should have just said what makes you panic is the female anatomy.
Yeah, wow, just women in general.
Just women.
Well, the production did have to take a brief pause during the final months of Jodie Foster's pregnancy, but it did resume after she gave birth to her son. Now, as you can probably already tell, this had become far from the simpler shoot that Fincher had been hoping for. His meticulous planning, as we mentioned, may have helped him feel prepared during pre-production, but during the shoot itself, it proved to be frustrating to his crew and especially to his cast. You know, Fincher has always been known for doing a ton of takes in his films, just shooting a scene over and over and over again. But that technique really seemed to reach its apex during Panic Room, and it's because he's trying to recreate the scenes that he created in the pre-visualization. So he's doing these takes after takes after take, trying to get the movement down so that it's exactly like it is in that previs. His need to do take after take doesn't come from the desire to wear down his actors to reveal some sort of truth like a lot of directors who are more sadistic might do. Fincher does it because he's trying to recreate the way that he sees the movie in his head. So if one little thing isn't a perfect recreation of his vision, he's willing to try it again and again until it's as close to perfect as it can get. For instance, there's one scene where Dwight Yoakam is hammering at the ceiling where he's trying to break into the Panic Room from below, you know, with a sledgehammer. And Fincher had them do this take over and over until it was exactly what he wanted, but they have to replace that plaster every time they do that scene. So every time that they do that, they have to take that piece of the ceiling off. They have to replaster, and it has to be replastered in a way to where it's going to break the exact same way as it did the last time in case they use shots from multiple takes, you know. So it takes about 45 minutes in between every single setup that they do on this. So this scene that takes about an eighth of a page, it should have been maybe a half a day shoot, took them 2 days to film. Then there's another scene where it's a simple scene, it would seem like, where they drop a bag. It drops right, you know, right in front of the camera frame. And they filmed that about 100 times because they wanted it. Fincher needed the bag to land exactly the way he wanted it to. And they filmed it 100 times until it got to that point.
And at some point it dawns like, oh, like time is money.
Oh yeah, but Fincher,
you know, come on.
He's a perfectionist though, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it, just like all the different ways he sets things up, and just for the people that are going to watch a movie 5 times versus the people that are watching it once. And
yeah.
So it's I said that like I hate that line or something. I don't. It's just we've said it on every episode, I think.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. But it applies to really all of his movies, it seems, at least so far.
Also, randomly, Kristen Stewart was like 11 when this started, and she grew 3 inches during the filming of the movie. So she started out, they said, like an inch and a half shorter than Jodie Foster, and she was taller than Jodie Foster by the end of it. So they had to, like, where they're trying to do some like reshoots of stuff, they were like, that was time consuming because they had to rethink everything.
Reframe, yeah.
Yeah, he was like, there's a huge difference between 11 years old and 12 years old, apparently.
Yeah. Well, this need for perfection caused the shoot to go on much longer than anyone had anticipated it to. In the end, the shoot lasted about 120 days. with 2,000 unique camera setups used and nearly 1.2 million feet of film were shot. Now, it should be noted that this Panic Room was the last time that David Fincher ever shot on film. After this, he is full digital, starting with his next movie, and all the way to this day, every single thing he shot is digital, which probably lends itself to his way of shooting a little bit more, because you're not having to spend the money on a bunch of film, for one thing, which film is incredibly expensive. That's one of the biggest, line items on any film is the film itself. But it lets him do these long takes, take after take, even more than he was able to do before, because now he doesn't have the limitations of the film running out. He just shoots digital. So
I cannot imagine what that many feet of film looks like. I'm sure it's all on rolls, but I don't know.
But still, that's a lot. I don't know what the average is used on a movie, but it's not that much.
Well,
that's a
5,280 feet in a mile. So
thank you. Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Todd. You want to do the math on that divided by 1.2 million?
I'm on it. Of
course. Okay, thanks, Todd. Get back to us.
Yep.
So the most difficult and most expensive scene to shoot was the one at the beginning of the film. We've already mentioned it a couple times here, but it's the one where the camera flies through the house as the three burglars arrive. Fincher said that he wanted to shoot this as if you were a fish in a fishbowl looking out at a hungry cat. It's all shot from the inside of the house, not from the outside. Now, this scene took 9 days to shoot, plus several months in post-production to complete the visual effects required to stitch it all together so that it appears to be a single unbroken shot. And they refer to this scene as the big shot. That's what they call it. Now, this scene obviously would have been impossible to pull off before the rise of digital effects. He does a much shorter, smaller version of it in Fight Club at the very beginning, when we see the camera zoom down from the top of the building all the way down to the parking garage and into the van where we see the bomb and everything. So this is sort of like that, but stretched out to a much longer scene. The thing that I like about it so much in Panic Room is that it's not just that it's cool. Don't get me wrong, it is cool. It's a very cool scene. Fincher isn't doing this as a single take, or what appears to be a single take, in an effort to show off. The only show-offy thing in it is where it goes through the handle of the coffee urn thing. That's a little show-offy, but otherwise he's not really trying to show off here. Instead, he's doing it in order to show that there's a danger lurking outside the house. And we know that Meg and Sarah are sleeping during it because there's not a cut. By not cutting, he's letting you know this is all happening at the same time. Like when you see them sleeping and you see them breaking in, the camera hasn't made an edit. So there's no questioning whether or not they're still asleep while this is all happening, and it's all doing this while establishing the geography of the house so that, we're very well familiar with it during the coming crisis. It's a really great way to build tension, I think, because it, by showing that they're sound asleep, not knowing anything's going on while these guys are trying to break into their house, like that is terrifying and relatable to anyone who's ever heard like a weird sound in their house in the middle of the night. Anybody can relate to that the idea that you're sleeping and somebody's trying to get into what should be your safe place. It's really fantastic.
It's something that I've been thinking about way too much because of this movie and something else. And I don't know if I'm going to have a whole conversation about it on this podcast, but I was just I was telling Jennifer the other day, I was like, man, what would I do? Some of this shit goes down. What am I going to do about it? And it's I need a machine gun or something.
Is somebody trying to break into your house, Gary?
Not yet, but they could. And if I talk about it and they know now that I don't have a machine gun, then they're going to try even more. But it's it's creepy. The weird thing with this is that with Fincher, it's so totally different than anything he's done already that in every other movie so far, it feels like in some aspect, one way or the other, he's thinking ahead of what's coming and you're catching up. You're learning as you go and all this. This time around, everything ahead of time. Sometimes more before the characters even know stuff. So you get to just have that again, that like omniscient thing. Like you get to see where everybody is, you know what's happening.
Yeah,
And
it's that whole like Hitchcock thing where you show a bomb under the table, but the characters don't know the bomb is there, but the audience knows that there's a ticking bomb under. Like that's suspense. And so it's kind of the same thing where you're one step ahead of Meg and Sarah for a lot of this because you have the advantage of seeing the three burglars and know what they're trying to do to get into that room. Whereas all Meg and Sarah can do is watch them on these fuzzy black and white CCTV monitors. That's the only way that they have to know what's going on. So they're very limited. Whereas we see and hear everything, you know?
Yeah. So it's interesting to see Fincher do something like that versus, because I mean, up until this point too, we talked about even before like that between Fight Club and Seven and all of that stuff. Like he's like the surprise ending
the ending guy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And this is like such a straightforward movie.
Yeah.
And anyway, but I just thought that was a kind of a neat approach for him or something new to try, but still somehow pulls it off. It's a very good thriller.
It is, yeah. So although it was much less so than on Fight Club, on Panic Room, Fincher did still find himself butting heads with the studio when it came time to market and release the film. As he went into the editing phase during post-production, Fincher refused to edit it down to a PG-13 rating, which would have required him to remove some of the language because there are multiple fucks in it. I think at one point Jared Leto just says fuck, 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 fuck all over, like 4 or 5 times in a row. And then he would have also had to remove most of the on-screen violence, which he was not willing to do.
I think he had an exact quote that said, "You're not going to take Leprechaun and turn it into Chicago with a couple of weeks of editing."
He also battled with the studio over how they decided to sell the film. Marketing materials advertised it as, quote, the most terrifying movie ever made, which is Jesus. A bit of hyperbole. And David Fincher thought so too. He's like, come on, guys, really? It's the most terrifying movie ever made. And they also sold it as being from the director of Seven and Fight Club, which he also disliked because he felt that the movie was so different from his previous films that by selling it as from the director of Seven and Fight Club would create the wrong expectations for the audience.
Yeah, I think they said too that the marketing, he's always battling the marketing department, isn't he? But it's
he seems to be.
Yeah, the other one they wanted to do was from the director of Seven and Fight Club, the star of Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, you're just creating unnecessary expectations for the audience.
And he said that they did get like some of the test screenings, like some of the comment cards were people saying they expected something darker, like on that part.
Which is so ironic because that's the exact opposite of what happened with Seven, where there was like, oh, this is a movie with, the guy who was in Driving Miss Daisy and the guy who was in Legends of the Fall. And then they get Seven, which is much darker than what they were expecting.
Yeah, it's sort of unrelated, but I was reading one interview with him around the time of when The Killer came out, his newest one, and they were saying like something about him being an auteur, and they're like, nobody ever pins you down that way, and he's like, because all my stuff's like really random. You can't stack like Panic Room, next to Seven, and he's like, he said, I'm so bad at that because A, I don't care, and B. At the point in time that I was making Fight Club, people were saying, how could you? And then I make The Killer, and now people are going, why don't you treat it like your earlier, more important movies?
I can't
He's
win.
like, I cannot win. That's literally what he said. I cannot win.
Well, this whole marketing thing ended up being a non-issue anyway, because when Panic Room was released on March 20th, 2002, it came in #1 at the box office with an opening weekend take of $30 million, which was the highest opening weekend for both Fincher and Jodie Foster's careers. And it actually surpassed The Matrix to have the biggest Easter holiday weekend opening ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Jeez. Yeah, it's nuts. And audiences were loving it, obviously. Word of mouth was really good. The critics were right there with them. While some critics did criticize it for being too mainstream as a follow-up to Fight Club, which is a stupid critique, I think. Most critics gave it positive reviews, recognizing it as a crowd-pleasing thriller, like recognizing it for what it is, while praising Fincher and how well he pulled that off. Roger Ebert, for instance, called it A chess game where the board and all the pieces are in full view, both sides know the rules, and the winner will simply be the better strategist. Then he went on to call it as close to the ideal of a thriller existing entirely in a world of physical and psychological plausibility. So at its core, I think Panic Room is like, it's David Fincher's simplest film, conceptually. Obviously, as we've been discussing, the creation of Panic Room was anything but simple. But the movie itself is a pretty standard genre exercise. It's a home invasion thriller, a movie that's been done 1,000 times. And I think because of that, a lot of people consider it a lesser David Fincher film, as if it's not really worthy to stand beside his other work. And now, is it less complex than his other movies on a thematic level? Yeah, probably, maybe. It's not inspiring, college courses or books on philosophy like Fight Club did. But that was sort of the point when he made the movie. It's a popcorn movie. That's what he described it as. It's not your regular old popcorn movie. It's a David Fincher popcorn movie, and David Fincher makes some gourmet fucking popcorn. Like, this is artisanal popcorn that we're talking about here. But I think if this project had landed with some journeyman director, it may have made a little bit of money, but I don't know that we'd be talking about it today. But Fincher took this standard kind of B movie material. And that's not a knock against David Koepp's script, which I think David Koepp also knew that he was making kind of a B movie sort of popcorn movie with this. So that's not a knock on him, because I think that he nailed it from the script aspect as well. But Fincher took that and he kind of elevated it to art. I mean, maybe that's giving it a little too much credit, but to call it art. But I think it's really hard to make a thriller that works as well as this does. Now, Fincher probably doesn't consider it art because he's very self-depreciating. In one interview that I read from The Guardian in 2002, so this was like while he was promoting this movie, he actually breaks down the distinction between his work that he considers, quote unquote, movies and those he considers films. And he said, I'm going to read this whole quote because it's a little long, but he says, a movie is made for an audience, and a film is made for both the audience and the filmmakers. I think The Game is a movie, and I think Fight Club is a film. I think that Fight Club is more than the sum of its parts, whereas Panic Room is the sum of its parts. I don't look at Panic Room and think, wow, this is going to set the world on fire. These are footnote movies, guilty pleasure movies, thrillers, woman trapped in a house movies. They're not particularly important. Now, Fincher is, as I mentioned, famously self-depreciating. And although he sort of has a point here, I think he's being a little bit glib in that quote. I mean, yeah, Panic Room is a movie designed to thrill an audience. That's its number one mission, is to be a fun night out at the movies. But Fincher put as much work and skill into it as he would anything else that he's made. It's not like he's phoning it in here. Fincher's never phoned anything in. I don't think he's physically capable of phoning it in. And I think Panic Room, footnote film or not, I think Panic Room is a crucial entry in Fincher's filmography because it proves, maybe more than anything else that he's made up to this point, that he is a director who is fully in control of his films. Like I described him as a control freak earlier, and I don't think that he would argue that title being given to him. So while the rigidness of his filmmaking on Panic Room led to the shoot probably being more difficult than it may have been otherwise, I think it did pay off in the final product. As far as like home invasion thrillers go, I think this is about as good as it gets. I think this is like everything you want out of this genre of movie. It's very well done. So I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think? Like, how does this stand up against Fincher's other films, especially the ones that we've already talked about on this podcast?
For me, I think it's weird because I really like this movie. I can also definitely see why it's like the least memorable so far out of all of them, because it is this straightforward movie.
Sure.
It does surprise me a little that it's the one that hasn't gotten more treatment, or that it in general just hasn't gotten more treatment. Like there's no Blu-ray of it or whatever. And it's like
he is apparently working on a 4K restoration right now on it. So hopefully that'll come to pass soon. He got a hell of a DVD release though.
Oh, the DVD release is amazing.
3 discs,
huge.
yeah.
But it's just weird because it's like, this is a really good movie as far as thrillers go. I mean, it's right up there. So it's I mean, I do think that, yeah, of course, Seven and Fight Club are going to be more memorable, I guess, broadly.
Yeah.
But this movie, I mean, it's like you said, it's solid. And
Not
I
every
don't
movie
know.
has to be like a masterpiece. And I think Fincher knows that. I don't think he cares. I think he set out to make a certain type of movie and he pulled it off. He
I
wanted
watched
to make
him.
a fun popcorn movie.
Yeah, and that's what he did. And I saw multiple interviews with him where people want it to be something else. There was one I was watching just today that was like from some French show, and the people are all at the table like talking to him, and it's about Panic Room, and it just come out, and they're like, "Well, were you?" It's interesting. You were talking about class. Was there a statement on class here with like
Right.
Jodie Foster being able to purchase this house and then the wealth that she must have and blah, blah, blah. And he literally is like, I was not thinking about that at all. No, he was like, the movie was such that I needed Jodie Foster and her daughter to move into this house as quickly as possible. And I don't know how she got the money, but she did, and she's there. And so,
Well, there's a little line of dialogue that says that like he can afford it. So there's you
oh
you
yeah,
don't even
maybe
have to
that's it.
explain it. It's just that hey, the ex-husband's super rich. I mean,
He's like, we
it's
just
funny.
needed them to be in there at
Yeah.
at the movie to start.
I think some people try to read too far into it because I went on the Wikipedia page this morning and there's a whole section that says analysis. And then there are 3 subsections, and they are conspiracy thrillers and feminism. And there's a whole to do about that. Medicine and technology, and they're breaking down and analyzing this in that regard, and approach to mortality. And all those things are like, no, like none of that applies to this. You guys are reading into a movie that is not designed to be read into. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there are, you could project anything you wanted to onto it, but
Right.
that's not what Fincher was trying to do.
You're 100% projecting. In fact, in the commentary, now that you're saying that, I even remember they were like, he's like, I still get asked, what were you trying to say? And he's like, I don't know. I think what I was trying to say is 2 chicks get caught in a closet and 3 guys try to break in and they burn the place down.
Yeah, just let the movie be. And listen, I'm saying that as someone who likes to analyze movies, but not every movie lends itself to that. Like you can analyze how the movie was made, but not every movie has some deeper meaning. Sometimes it's just a roller coaster, which is what this is.
Yeah.
Now, Todd, this was your first time watching this, right?
Yes, I had seen parts of it before and was familiar with it, knew kind of like the general idea. But yeah, this was a first beginning to end watch through
Nice.
for me.
Did you have a good
Yeah.
time with it?
I enjoyed it. I like it. In terms of everything that we've covered with Fincher, this would probably be at the bottom.
Yeah, I'd put this
There
above
were-
the game personally.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. As the fresh take guy, I ended up kind of putting myself, because as I'm reading through things and knowing that Fincher wanted to make a popcorn movie of Fincher's, style, knowing that, kind of, even just that little bit of information, knowing that kind of colors how you might approach the movie. So I was trying to approach it with, okay, I know that David Fincher directed this. I know what it's called. If I'm, 2002, just graduated high school, or about to graduate high school, let's go to the movies and let's watch this thing, see what it's like. I've seen the Game, I've seen Fight Club, so I kind of think I know where Fincher's coming from and what to expect. And if I walked in there when I walked out of the theater, would I still be like super cool and super pumped about it? There were a couple of narrative things that kind of, it didn't ruin the movie for me, but it kind of took me out of it for a second. The burglars made this whole big thing about they're not supposed to be in there. They're not supposed to be in there. And it's not like they couldn't see into the place. And, from the main floor and from the basement level, there were big windows where you could see stuff in there.
But there's
And
not
yet
a lot
they
of stuff
still broke
in there.
Yeah, but they still went in. And it was just kind of like, I mean, you guys have put in a lot of planning. Wouldn't
I don't
you say,
know. I
hey,
mean,
let's head back to the clubhouse and figure this out?
well, I can kind of buy that because one, there's not a lot of stuff in it. The house is mostly empty and it's dark and the lights are off.
Yeah, I think,
And they're outside where it's pouring down rain and like there's all of that stuff is something you can pretty easily like explain away. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't ruin it, but it's just kind of like, really, you wouldn't see the pizza and on the counter and go, hey, maybe we should come back tomorrow.
I don't
Like,
think they would have been able to see that from the outside where they were though.
yeah, but anyways,
Because
like I
again,
said,
it's in the middle of the
it.
night, so all the lights are off, and
They weren't off.
He wanted to do it. He said he wanted to do it in like pitch black at one point, like or kind of like really, really dark. And but also I look at that as kind of what we talked about with the game, like giving yourself over to the movie a little bit and just
right.
I don't know,
because if they had done that, then the whole fucking movie doesn't exist.
Exactly. So it's like I said, it doesn't ruin it for me, but just maybe because I worked in home security and because I was a law enforcement officer, it was like,
you worked in home security too. Is there a job that you have not done, Todd?
My resume is extensive. But yeah, looking at that sort of thing, like I said, it doesn't ruin it for me, but it just kind of made me stop and question for a second. But then the movie carries on. It's like, okay.
Yeah. That's a little nitpicky though.
Yeah, it's a nitpick. The other thing was the panic room itself is so advanced. And it's not empty. Like there's at least 3 huge crates in there full of random stuff. No chocolate bar. Like there's I mean,
why would you stock your panic room with chocolate?
There's usually rations of some kind that go with like survival kits and stuff like that.
I think you're nitpicking again there, Todd.
Well, again, like it's so extensive. They made a point to show like all these crates full of all this stuff, and it could have been explained away with one line of dialogue of like, hey, there was a crate full of rations. We've gone ahead and taken that out because they were old and yada yada yada. Okay, great.
I mean, that
again, it's
obviously
nitpick.
Watch the movie however you want to watch it, but that almost feels like you're looking for things.
I really wasn't.
Like, you know what I mean?
Really wasn't. And like I said earlier about not feeling completely invested in the characters, and Jodie Foster definitely bringing a different energy to the movie, and these couple little things that again I wasn't looking for, but when presented, and I mean we're in the business, fellas, of analyzing these movies, and so I don't just want to, saw the movie, okay, let's go talk about it. No, I mean I watched it a couple weeks ago, or probably after our last recording. And so I've had time to marinate on it. And I'm not saying I hate the movie. I don't hate the movie. I actually do like this movie. But it's not as great as everything else we've talked about of David Fincher's, which is why for me this would be on the bottom. So it's a good movie. It looks great. There's great performances in it. There's a lot of really, really great stuff. But again, your question was, how does this rank for you? It's on the bottom.
For the record, while you were doing this, there is I don't know why, a website called MRE Info. And there's a whole thread talking about movies that feature rations and MREs. And they were discussing on if they were in Panic Room. And the person says, I just watched this last year on German TV. They do appear for little bits of time on camera when Jodie is looking for breath sprays for her daughter, and second when they sit on the floor there surrounded by eaten MREs. They had opened MREs, I guess, and eaten them, but no chocolate, I guess. But they had rations.
I mean, wouldn't food of any kind like help her?
No, not if you're like really diabetic. Like my brother used to get we'd have dinner, and then a little while later he had to have like something like more sugary, like more sugar in it.
Yeah. If your diabetes is not severe, regular food might be fine. But if it's severely diabetic, like you need candy, chocolate, sugar.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is not something that would necessarily be in a panic room unless the person who owns the panic room is diabetic and is planning ahead. But if the old man who lived there wasn't, then why would he have bothered?
Yeah, I
You
just
know?
figured with 3 large crates, there would have been something.
I
But
mean, with 3 large, you could say that about anything. Oh, why did this?
yeah,
Why is there not a dildo in that crate? You're like, well, you could say, oh, there's 3 crates. Surely one of them has a fucking dildo in it, right?
You know what makes me panic is being stranded for too long a period of time without a dildo.
Anyway, the film Panic Room went on to gross nearly $200 million during its theatrical run, making it Fincher's second highest grossing movie to date after Seven, which made about, 327 or so. Now, Fincher, of course, who is always his biggest critic, was never totally happy with Panic Room, and he blamed the problems that he saw in the film on his own rigid thinking, his own inability to be spontaneous during the shoot of the film. In one interview, he says, "It obviates a sense of authorship by the thespians," which is a fucking word salad, but you get the point. He says you need that to go, you're missing something here. And I want people to feel like they can stop the train and say that. He later told the New York Times, "I was kind of impatiently waiting for everybody to get where I'd already been a year and a half ago. And I've been trying to nip that in the bud. I felt like I needed to be more attentive to watching the actors." So he understood that like this way of filmmaking is not sustainable because it ceases to be a collaborative process to a point. That's why Darius Kanji ended up leaving the film, because it was no longer a collaborative process, which filmmaking should be and usually is. But Fincher did learn his lesson. He needed to loosen up a bit. He recognized that. And he would still continue to be an exacting perfectionist, and technology was starting to catch up with his meticulous nature, like I mentioned earlier, with the rise of digital film. And although he would never stop demanding multiple takes from his actors in a desire to reach that perfection, with his next film, Fincher would learn to let go a little bit, to allow more spontaneity on set, and to listen to his actors, and to rely a lot less on previs. And this more relaxed nature would help him to produce one of his finest films yet, which is going to be the subject of the next and final episode in our David Fincher Rules of the Game series, and that is the 2007 true crime thriller Zodiac.
no, I'm looking forward to it. That's gonna
You
be
seen
fun. Years ago,
It's been a while for me.
I recall liking it, and I recall there were good performances in it. But
I'm sure you'll find some stuff to nitpick about it. So
sure, yeah.
Well, speaking of which, where can you guys be found on the internet?
You can find me on @thisisGaryHorde, all spelled out. I also work with the National Wrestling Alliance, and you can access their links in their bio on all the social medias there @NWA.
I'll be appearing at Trek Long Island, May 31st through June 2nd at the Hyatt Regency Long Island, along with the Trek Queen of New York City, Flip Kiki. Be sure to stop by, say hello, take selfies, and give me handfuls of money for no reason. I'm just kidding. I'll have some merch. My show, Computer Resume Podcast, is available wherever you get your podcasts. We are covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order, but you can find that wherever you get your podcasts, at Computer Resume on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, for as long as TikTok still exists, Venmo, and Patreon. And I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, X, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond, as long as they behave themselves.
You're on TikTok with Computer Resume?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is it just videos of you talking?
Usually.
Are you doing like little dances or anything? You're doing little like lip sync dances or?
Not yet.
No?
Don't tempt me.
All right, well, consider yourself tempted. So, I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find me on all the usual places, Letterboxd, X, Instagram. You can also find the podcast at cinema_shock on all the social media sites, including Letterboxd, where you can follow us. And of course, you can find us at cinemashock.net. You'll find all of our episodes there. You'll find our merch, our Discord, and soon, hopefully, some sort of patron thing, which we're working on, to maybe look for that soon. I think that's all I got today, right? Until next time.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys.
Oh, nothing, huh?
No.
But
Would you guys like to know just how long 1.2 million feet of film is in miles?
Yes.
absolutely. I'm really glad that you brought.
If you've put in
this
the
back
work,
up.
I need to know.
227.27 repeating miles.
Wow, that's like from here to Florida.
Yeah.
Or something
How
like
about
that.
that?
I don't know.
Something
I
like
don't know. Something like that.
That's interesting.
That's
I,
what we
uh,
do here on Cinema Shock. We bring you the facts.
You know what makes me panic? Fear of failure.